Welcome to Design Emergency, the podcast that investigates design's fundamental role in our life and in that of all species and ecosystems. I'm Paola Antonelli, and together with Alice Rawsthorne, we believe that design is not only one of the highest expressions of human ingenuity, but also a means to address emergencies big and small, even and especially those of our own making. So I'm happy and honored today to introduce you to Beatriz Colomina and Mark Wigley, whose work on the fringes of architecture I've been avidly following for years because they consistently and spectacularly ask questions that architecture tends to avoid until it's forced to confront them. Beatriz is professor of architecture and founding director of the program in media and modernity at Princeton. And Mark is professor of architecture at Columbia GSAP, which is the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation, and also its former dean. And together, very simply, they have reshaped architectural history. Their research often starts from what might seem tangential or even accidental to architecture, like media, the body, sexuality, and now bacteria. But those zones turn out to be where architecture reveals its deepest assumptions and misconceptions. It's almost an investigative approach. They follow overlooked evidence and let it reorganize the entire history of the discipline. That same thinking extends to their exhibitions, which often I'm jealous of, and which illustrate and test their ideas in space. In their new book, We, the Bacteria, Notes Toward a Biotic Architecture, along with the 2025 exhibition at the Triennale in Milan by the same name, is a manifesto for a new architectural philosophy where bacteria are seen as fundamental agents in the built environment, not enemies. The book reframes architecture not as a shield against microbes, but rather as a biological system that organizes coexistence. So, Beatriz and Mark, welcome to Design Emergency. I hope I've explained what you're about to say well, what you did with the bacteria well.
Hey, thank you very much, Paola. We are really honored to be part of your series. And of course, you explained it very well, better than we could have.
I'm sure, much better.
No, I don't think so. But let's talk about the title. We, the bacteria. To any American, and probably to the rest of the world in these days, the connection to the U.S. Constitution is unmistakable. So, the U.S. Constitution starts with we, the people. But what shifts politically and culturally when we replace the people with bacteria?
Well, it's such a key question now, because if you're a designer or a design thinker, then and you care, and if design is a form of care, then the question is care for whom or to what? And we've always assumed that it's for the human, and we are thinking, well, but if you look closely at the human is actually not so human. The human is each of us 100 trillion bacteria, so that's a kind of political community. So in a way, design is already political and already needs to think carefully about who it serves. And in this case, okay, it serves us, but we are bacteria. So yes, you're right. Of course, it's a manifesto for a new way of thinking about living with others.
And it's also a declaration of rights in a way, right? Because if you say we, the bacteria, and we're made of bacteria, it's really a wide-ranging. But also you said something important, which is that architecture and design are care. That's a big statement. You threw it out as if it were nothing, but could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, because it's always been like that. All architectural history claims to be care, right? If you think about Vitruvius argues that the architect should also be a doctor, because the most important goal of an architect, of a designer actually, is the health of the client, the health of the inhabitant. So throughout history, you see this repetition of the same idea in multiple ways, because of course, what is health changes. Paradigms of health change over time enormously. And at the center of this care, from the Renaissance to today, there is always this very athletic, very macho man, which is the man of Vitruvius, the man of Leonardo, right? To the man of Le Corbusier, right? So this white man, very, very athletic, of a certain age, and you wonder how it is that this fiction has been organizing architecture for centuries, right? When in fact, even if you happen to be white and male and beautiful and athletic, we may want to ask, how long does this last? So we, in fact, are very, very fragile creatures that need to be kept at like 36 to 37 degrees inside temperature, that we need architecture precisely as a kind of protection, a kind of cocoon against all these questions. So now the paradigm of health is precisely the microbiome. So unlike other moments in history where the biggest threat was tuberculosis in the 20th century, or all the diseases of all the epidemics of the 19th century, cholera, typhoid fever, etc. Now we're in a new paradigm that we have to take care of the microbiome. And the microbiome is this community that Mark was talking about, of the trillions of bacteria that inhabit us. And now we know this at a health level. Everybody's taking probiotics or kefir or whatever. But nobody understands how much architecture and design are implicated in this loss of diversity that is a major threat to our species.
Yeah, and it's an emergency. So actually, it's an emergency maybe caused by design. So that's so interesting, and was very beautifully said in your introduction, that sometimes design and architecture is producing the problem and then trying to solve it, and then making another problem and solving it. And part of the kind of mission of the book is to do a kind of new history of architecture, at least 10,000 years of it, and maybe that's a short history, trying to see architecture always from the point of view of microbes. And in that story, architecture is always trying to take care, but then it's actually producing a new problem. And then and so in a way, the concept of care changes. And I think it's true that we think architecture maybe at its highest or most ambitious or most beautiful is caring, but the concept of care has to change now, because care in the past meant protecting this fragile creature that Beatriz talks about, that architecture was a form of shelter. You keep the enemy out, you keep the wind out, you keep flexibility out, temperature out, humidity, insects, and so on. Now, really, that's a problem, because if you keep the other out, again, politically, if you refuse the immigrants, if you keep everybody at bay, everybody suffers. And so care now has to mean what it means to live with what you're afraid of. So a new kind of, I guess the book is a manifesto for thinking of shelter is actually a way of living with what threatens you. To have the enemy, let's say, inside. And we can learn, because, everybody's afraid of bacteria, but we are made of bacteria. So we are afraid of ourselves.
And also, the idea that architecture can be an antidote and an attack against the arrogance of the Anthropocene, the idea that we are the center of the universe and the universe exists for us, is very powerful. And this is something that you've been working on for quite a while. I'm thinking, I could go back to X-ray architecture, Beatriz, about the idea of the invisible. That is, by the way, to everybody else, a book from the 1990s, mid-1990s. But then, in particular, the exhibition, Are We Human?, that you organized in Istanbul at the Triennial in 2016, you really attacked that pretense of being the center of the universe. So bacteria are naturally the next step, I would say. And I'm wondering if there's a step beyond that.
What would be the next exhibition? So, of course, so Are We Human was the big exhibition and book project of 2016. It really took us 9 years to come up with the answer. Like, the question was, are we human? And the answer is, we are bacteria. I think you're absolutely right that there could and should and must be like another book, right? But because we are teachers, I guess our dream is that there are many books, and these are written by many people. 9 years from now, we'll have a new set of questions and maybe a new exhibition and so on. But really, what we are much more interested in what others do with this. What our students and our colleagues do with this. And I think it is a very beautiful moment in architecture right now, where there is a new generation of thinkers in the museums and in the schools and in the architectural studios and in the design offices. And they're somehow collaborating with scientists and fashion designers and thinkers and cultural activists. And together, there's a kind of new way of thinking of how we could be a little bit less stupid with ourselves and the world. And as teachers, we are in the business of stupidity reduction, right? So architecture and architectural discourse has been, powerfully stupid and deeply complicit with, as you point out, a kind of self-centered human arrogance, which is so destructive, not only of the planet, but of the human. Mm-hmm. So in a way, we just turn inwards now. We just say, okay, let's just, in a way, take seriously the weirdness that is the human and the beauty of the human. And it's just another story, another thought.
Yes, but also we were very inspired looking back historically by all these, what we call, I don't know, precedents or kind of board of other artists and architects that have thought about this for a long time. So for me, it was particularly inspiring to think about Lina Bobardi and when she's doing her beautiful glass house in Sao Paulo. And we found in the archive these amazing drawings that she did of every little creature that was living on the side, all these insects, all these animals, all these little creatures. And you think about it, okay, what does an architect do before they design a house? Okay, if you're lucky, they design the side, they take account of the side, and if you're lucky, they put some trees that are existing. But how many architects do you know that take account of all the little, even cockroaches living in the space? And I think this is an incredible inspiration for us, because it's saying, okay, I'm going to put my house there, but this is a habitat already by all these other species, and I want them to survive. I want them to be living still after the house, and of course she will die before all these species continue to live and reproduce in this area, and it's very important to account for that. And it was not only her, of course, there was so many other architects and fashion designers like Margiela, and all these fantastic people. Yeah, so that was very inspirational.
So it's a kind of maybe an alternative set of role models, and Hunterwasser and Gordon Clark and
Alan Sonfest.
They have helped us to sort of think, what does it mean to let go of this arrogance, and in a way to let design breathe also, because maybe design has been constrained by some sort of moral defensive code that design should be sort of stiff and protective, should be some sort of prophylactic between the human and this wild world. Well, it turns out that we are wild too. We are animals, and it is the most beautiful thing about us, and the most and it's interesting you mentioned Lina Bo. She loved that word habitat. She even turned that word into her magazine, and she brought a lot of that from Italy. She brought a lot of this from Rome and Milan, where what it means to love a tree was central to all the designers around her. So we feel this book is a little bit like, as Beatriz said, also just pointing back to parts of our own history, of design history, that can lead us down this new direction.
You also argued that architecture could be partly responsible for the big antibiotic crisis that we are witnessing today. So what do you think is the biggest misconception that we still have about clean buildings?
Yes, well, it's the same misconception that we have in everyday life. All these antibacterial products that we use in our house to extremes. The most dangerous place to be in right now is in a hospital. As you know, many people go for a routine problem, including people that I know, for a routine problem to a hospital and end up dying, right? I mean, I do have a friend that went for a replacement knee and ended up with an infection. So all these bacteria resistant to antibiotics is the product of these hermetic buildings and these cleaning protocols that are so extreme that produce what they call in extremophile, so bacteria that is resistant to all this cleaning, and they're extremely dangerous. The World Health Organization already announced that this will be the major cause of death in 2027. So we are almost there, right? And we don't seem to realize how much architecture is implicated in this major crisis that, according to some of the scientists that we are working with, it will kill us before climate change, right?
Wow.
So if you were very human-centric, right, and you said, I really only care about the human, well, the human is on the way out through design. We have, in a way, designed our own departure by producing these hygienic spaces. Inside every nuclear reactor, there are microbes that just love nuclear radiation. So whatever you use to kill bacteria becomes food for another bacteria, or forces the bacteria to change itself, to mutate, to develop a form that's extremely horrific for the human. And I suppose there's a kind. Let's say if to think about bacteria is, as you rightly pointed out, to think politically, we can have a different political model coming from the immune system. Our immune system, which is amazing. We are our immune system. Immune system is sort of holding us in place, as it were. We used to think the immune system was keeping danger out, but now it's very much understood the immune system is kind of like a museum curator. It curates a community of bacteria that's a kind of healthy community. And inside all of us are very, very deadly microbes that are not deadly because they don't have so much food or space. They're part of our internal community. And architecture has disrupted this. It has restricted the diversity of the inside of our microbiome, and the obsessive cleanliness, as Beatriz says, has just produced our greatest enemy, antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So this book, of course, is pretty unimpressed with design, right? Like, design has caused the two problems that are going to kill us before climate change: the collapse of our microbial diversity. We have only half the microbes that humans had before architecture. So architecture hasn't managed to accomplish removing 50% of our microbes, and it has encouraged a 50% increase at the same time in antimicrobial resistance. So our grandchildren can't survive in this situation. So this calls for a revolution in design. This is in the terms of your project, Paola. This is design emergency. An emergency caused by design, and with a bit of luck and intelligence, hence the stupidity reduction, we could think our way towards a design that is a little bit like the immune system. It's much more porous. It's much more curatorial. Mm-hmm. To think of an object or a chair or a house or a room or a street or a city that is somehow building a diverse community, which includes, things that seem worrying, frightening, threatening, and building this community. Getting back to the hospitals, there was this amazing 5 public hospitals in Milano during COVID. Instead of disinfecting all the walls, they sprayed the walls with bacteria every 2 days.
Good bacteria.
With good bacteria, which are, just ordinary bacteria, 5 of them, 5 bacteria.
Wow, I'm very proud. Very proud.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's amazing.
So less antimicrobial resistant bacteria developed. Patients needed less medication. They got healthier twice as quick, and they left the hospital twice as quick. So hypothetically, all hospitals everywhere should learn from Milan, again, and learn that don't try to clean your hospital, actually try to fill it with bacteria. This would apply to our homes.
Yes, in fact, antibiotic-resistant bacteria is only one of the worst problems, but it happens that everyday life, it's been demonstrated already scientifically that people that clean their houses extremely well or with a lot of antibacteria, their kids have more autoimmune disorders, more allergies, etc. It's a very, very beautiful, really frightening study in this area of Finland that after the war, Karelia was split. And it was the same area, right? And one part ended up in what now is Russia, and then the other part in Finland. The part that ended up in Finland industrialized rapidly, people were living in modern buildings, etc. And the part in what is now Russia continued to be agriculture, etc. Well, this group of people have the same genetic makeup, so they did an amazing study in which they studied the kids, particularly living in this area, and it turned out to be that the people in Finland, the kids in Finland, are having all the problems of the West, autoimmune disorders, all kinds of allergies, etc. And the people in the Russian side have none of the above. And you may remember, but when I went to school, when Mark went to school, nobody in our school had allergies to peanuts or to any of those things. So we have created this situation, right?
We were much dirtier than the kids of today, for sure.
Yeah.
In a good way.
Much better for you.
As you know, we build our set of, each of us has a unique set of microbes, a unique community, which we have curated between the years of 0 and 3. And by the time you put together your community, it's fixed. And so you've got only the 3 years to do that. And if you're too clean during those years, you will have a difficulty with the world. You will not have a good immune system. So one argument might be, coming from this book, that all designers should think only about kids between the ages of 0 and 3. And if we just focus our efforts on those tender years, then everybody will be healthier, and everything else will take place. And makes us wonder, when we were writing this book, like, where are the babies 0 to 3? They don't appear in Le Corbusier's drawing of the future of architecture. Suddenly this man appears out of the middle of nowhere, and just to think about this moment where a child curates their own special combination, it's much more unique than our fingerprints. And when you look at somebody's microbes, if you look at my microbes, you can tell I came from New Zealand. You can tell I also moved to New York. You could tell I'm living with Beatriz. You can probably tell that I'm a teacher because I'm getting a lot of exposure to students from 100 different countries. So inside of us, this community is almost like a kind of an album of our lives. It's a kind of like record. And as all of us who live in cities love the fact that we somehow every day encounter ideas and thoughts and people and food and that we'd never experienced before. Likewise, inside our bodies is this kind of cosmopolitan mix. So how to make an architecture that nurtures the inside of us, this sort of internal city, and makes this, let's say, a more beautiful place. I'm sorry for going on so long, but if you did that, if you took care of the inside, selfishly, the inside of the human, actually we would be less violent with the planet. We would have a softer touch. We would not disconnect ourselves from the soil. We as humans, we grew up in the soil. What a crime it is for architecture to separate us from the soil.
And in your campaign, in your pro-bacteria and pro-microbes campaign, COVID probably was like a breach, right? Because it was a milestone in the life of humankind and also in the life of the planet, because we got out of the way for a while, right? So what did the pandemic teach us about space, safety, and health? And what did it not teach us?
It's very, very interesting, because many of the things that have been put in history, like containment, came back, right? So in many ways, what we have learned from the Black Death in Italy and from the containment of the population came back. And in many ways, also part of modern architecture came back, in as much as people, of course, that had a terrace benefited enormously from this situation. What is still very little understood, but I think this study of the hospitals in Milano offers some light into this question, is how much people's microbiome had an effect on whether they survive or not, whether they got very sick or they didn't. So people with healthier microbiomes, and there are studies now underway about this question, did better during COVID. Right, but in terms of architecture, of course, it has consequences. Every epidemic has consequences in architecture in the city, and we're still living this. We are still seeing this. It will take a while to see it, but I think we saw New York transform. We never seen New York with all these cafes and all these spaces outside. They were none, right? Or they were very few, and now the city has changed. So that was a positive, I think.
Yeah, it's very interesting what you say about COVID. In fact, Beatriz was teaching a class at Princeton for some time on pandemics.
Architecture in the age of pandemics.
And then COVID happened, and they all accused her of being a witch, of having, in a way, predicted that something would happen. And in a way, yeah, it is a prediction. It's inevitable. I mean, COVID is really just a little taste. Imagine that during tuberculosis epidemics at the beginning of the century, when modern architecture was being formed, were killing 1 in 3, 1 in 4 people in cities. Imagine the Black Death in the 14th century, killing 50% of the global population of the earth, and then coming back 10 years later and doing it again and again and again for 400 years. And then architecture developed a kind of immune reaction. We learned about cleanliness, about sanitation, about toilets, social distancing. We developed a set of protocols, and we keep forgetting them. Whenever the disease goes away, we forget them. And then when the disease comes back, so COVID brought back all of these quarantine, social distancing, hygiene, all these things that were developed in 14th and 15th century in response to the plague. So maybe COVID was just a taste, and maybe it would be good for architects to be not waiting for the epidemic, but in a way developing designs that decrease the likelihood of such a traumatic event. New York, as Beatriz says, it's a better city to live in because of COVID. So it's also the case that every human disaster, I don't want to be sort of bombastic, but if you think about it, trauma, crisis, emergency often produce the best of us as a species, and maybe the best of architecture. And I think if we dream of the best, maybe we have to think of the worst. And this book really does take you down. I'll give you one example. Architecture more or less begins 10,000 years ago. We invent the first sort of prophylactic shelter. Immediately humans got shorter. And our lives got shorter because tuberculosis loved architecture, still does, by the way. So always, architecture triggers a crisis, and then it triggers a beautiful reaction. We're very interested in what's the beautiful reaction that might come now.
So beautiful. Well, one of the most enduring images of the pandemic is the personal mask. And, it's more common maybe in the East, but not in the West. And now it's sadly come back to life. We see it every day in the newspaper because of the attacks over American citizens that are happening everywhere in our country. But it makes me wonder, not only at the level of the individual, but also at the level of policies and regulations, when does hygiene stop being about health and start being about control and power?
You can almost say that it's been centuries, right? I mean, the control of the population, the control of the state during the Black Death in Italy is exactly that, right? I mean, the containment, all the measures that are put in place to not allow people to come in a city that has been affected by this. Or if you think about all the colonial powers in El Congo, for example, when the Belgians designed the European city and they established this 400-meter band that will separate the city of the indigenous population from the city of the European, with the belief that the 400 meters is the maximum distance that a mosquito will fly, which is completely wrong. And also the stupid idea that the people carrying the disease are the indigenous, when in fact the people that were more problematic were the Europeans. You can say that the history of architecture is the history of disease, that you can see all the structures and infrastructures that were put in place always in response to an epidemic, right? So in Italy, you see the lazarettos, in the colonies, you see all these prophylactic bands that actually come also from the time of the Black Death. When you get to the 19th century, you see all the infrastructure works of the 19th century. Everybody may admire what is the structure in London, the Embankment of London, architecturally as one of these incredible pieces of monumental architecture, but few people understand that this was in response to a very serious pandemic of cholera, and that finally they introduced sewers and clean water into the city. So every time we react to the previous pandemic, putting in place new structures, and then, as Mark was saying, as soon as the pandemic passes, we develop all collective amnesia and move on to the next one. And the next one is always surprising. Think about polio. All the diseases that are transmitted by fecal matter, like typhoid fever or cholera, were controlled radically with sanitation, with the sanitary reform, with the sewer system, with clean water, etc. And polio, who had never been an epidemic, who had never been a problem, exploded. Why was that? Precisely because the little kids, going back to this theme of the little kids, were no longer exposed to the virus in the soil, when they still had protection from their mothers, maternal immunity. So they encountered the virus later when they were already in school, 4, 5, 6 years old. And this is the paradox. The countries and the people that were more affected were rich countries like Sweden and the United States, had the worst polio epidemics. And it was not affecting so much poor people or African American communities, etc. So, but the middle class and the rich were much more affected. Why? Because they were cleaner. They were less in touch with the soil. Their houses were. So it's a disease of cleanliness and of rich countries.
Yeah, and just to pick up on that a little bit, I think probably the question of hygiene is always directly linked to power, but also to inequality. So these masks, as you talked about, the COVID masks and the masks of today, of course, they're also coming from the time of the Black Death. They're built into the culture at that point. But health and disease have always been the best way to understand inequality. I mean, actually, you could say that inequality is just another word for poor health. Lack of opportunity, physical contact, care, and so on.
Except the exception is polio, which is where in the exhibition of Milan, as you know, it was in inequalities, and we tried to address this issue from the point of view of disease, from the point of view of bacteria. And when you get to polio, you're stunned because, of course, it's not affecting so much poor people. Therefore, but except when the vaccine was invented, when the vaccine first emerged, because the vaccine required multiple shots and you have to go to the doctor, etc., all of a sudden, it became a disease of the poor and the unvaccinated because it was more difficult to get around to follow the protocol, right?
So hygiene regulations are very rarely about the health of everybody. They're almost always about the health of those in power. So if, for example, a nation like the United States treats itself like a house that has to be defended against, sort of a disease of immigration and so on. This is, of course, not about the health of either those that live here or those that live elsewhere. It's really about power. So there's been this sort of very, very intimate relationship between political power and disease is primarily bacterial. So in a way, you could say politics has always been about the negotiation of disease. We think of design as having made us a spectacular species, that our houses, then villages, and then cities, and then empires, and then sort of super empires have magnified our capacity. And it's true. But it's also true that it magnified the capacity of disease. So you can see politics is always trying to, in a way, draw a line between human success and the success of bacteria. And such a line cannot be drawn. And in a way, the book is just saying, let's stop drawing this line and get with that sort of sticky world of bacteria. And then I think there are goddesses like Lynn Margulis and Donna Haraway who become the guides then on what it means to share yourself with others. And, what if architecture is, and this is like one of the claims we're trying to make, right? What if architecture is just a way of sharing microbes? Every time we breathe in the microbes that are being breathed out by each other, but also the microbe oxygen is produced by bacteria, by plants. So every time we breathe, every time we occupy a space, every time we live with anything, anywhere, anytime, we are sharing and reforming ourselves with bacteria. And it seems to me this image of just breathing in, breathing out, living with our microbes, living with so much complexity is a much better image of what a city could be, or a house could be, or a nation could be, or what the planet could be. So I think even though we're telling you this sort of horrific story of basically death in architecture, part one, it's like a Mel Brooks movie, The History of the World, part one, death in architecture, and they never were separated. It's true, we take that view, but also with deep optimism. I mean, we are in this field, in this world of design, because like you, Paola, we actually think there are just so many cases in which actually design is not just a great response, but is actually the only way to respond. It is what response is. The human has this capacity to design. It may be the most human thing about us. And so if we could learn how design itself is somehow bacterial, that's organized by bacterial. Like I have 100 trillion microbes. Paola, you have 100 trillion. Beatriz has 100 trillion. So this is a conversation between 300 trillion microbes. And there's a lot of intelligence there, of which we are just sort of the guests. And I think if we could let architecture facilitate this, just in a very, and I think this is where we have an incredibly romantic view, like just let's enjoy life with microbes.
Yeah, mood is very much affected by microbes. This is one thing that we haven't talked about, mental illnesses, not only all the diseases of our time, cancer, autoimmune disorders, obesity, all these allergies, etc. All these disorders are the result of the lack of diversity of our microbiome, but also our mental health. The epidemic of depression in young people is very much related to the fact that they have a very impoverished microbiome, the result of course, of fast food and all these things, but also of bad architecture. Right. So in that sense, we are very encouraged also when we did the exhibition. You saw in the last part of the exhibition, there were all these contemporary architects and designers working with bacteria. And it's also very interesting to see all these young people that are experimenting with new ways of doing architecture. So I also want to say that we are not the only ones, that there are people like Uriel Foguet, like Andrés Jaque, like Lydia Calipoliti, like all these other...
Rachel
Armstrong, like
Ecologic Studio. I mean, these are brilliant
people.
Actually, you know them all, Paola. You've exhibited all of them. They're like, I don't know, like a breath of fresh air.
Right.
Air filled with microbes.
Yeah. Beautiful way to end this. Thank you, Beatriz and Mark, for this great interview. You're so hopeful and optimistic. I'm glad to know that design and architecture are one more lever to make everything better. Everything, almost. So this is Design Emergency, and you have just heard from Beatriz Colomina and Mark Wigley. In their new book, We, the Bacteria, Notes Toward the Biotic Architecture, Beatriz and Mark present a powerful theory that invites us to think of bacteria as architects, partners, inhabitants, and maintenance crews of buildings and people and bodies, and push us to rethink the idea of shelter, moving away from the fear and exclusion of sterilization towards instead an embrace of coexistence and care with microbial life. Remember, you can find images concerning this interview, including a beautiful tooth with the Black Death bacterium. I just loved that image. In our Instagram feed, which is design.emergency. And you can dig through our archives to find more interviews by myself and by Alice Rosthorn with designers, architects, and others who are actively working to design a better world for all humans, all species, and all planets. Thank you, Beatriz and Mark. Ciao.
Ciao.